The wind carried the scent of danger long before anyone saw it. Claire, a little girl with autism who had never crossed the street alone before, stood frozen as the bikers closed in. But before fear could swallow her whole, her dog, Griffin, retired wounded, and Old stepped forward like a soldier called back from the dead. All because she whispered one word: guard. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move, will you please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The fog had not yet lifted from the sleepy town of Evergreen, Oregon, and the sun broke weakly through the overcast sky like an old flashlight flickering behind worn parchment. The quiet morning chill wrapped the neighborhood streets in a hush that felt almost reverent except for the distant hum of dread that had settled over the town in recent weeks. The bloodhounds, a biker gang that had made their presence known on the outskirts, were becoming bolder. Graffiti on old storefronts, threats to small businesses, and even a robbery at the gas station. These weren't rumors anymore. But the Morgan family, living just 3 blocks from the town's modest grocery store, clung to some semblance of normalcy. Sheriff Tom Morgan, tall and broad-shouldered in the way that made his sheriff's badge look like it belonged on a comic book hero, had made the call Claire could go on her first solo store trip, sort of. Claire Morgan was 9 years old, and unlike most children her age, she rarely spoke unless she had something carefully thought out to say. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when she was 5, Claire processed the world through a lens that was both astonishing and isolating. She noticed patterns in clouds, could recall the direction of every breeze from the previous day, and knew precisely how many steps it took to get from her porch to the corner hydrant 82.5. She disliked being touched, loved her routines, and wore the same navy blue jacket every morning because the buttons clicked right. Her long brown hair was parted severely down the middle and fell into a braid she insisted on tying herself, though it often hung crooked. Her companion this morning was Griffin, a 7-year-old male golden retriever with thick, honey-colored fur that shimmered in the muted sunlight like morning syrup. He moved with a quiet dignity, his gait slightly uneven from an old injury to his left hind leg, though he never showed pain. Griffin had once served as a K-9 unit in Portland's narcotics division. A veteran of dozens of high-risk busts, he bore a small notch in his right ear and a wisdom in his amber eyes that suggested he had seen far more than he could ever bark. After an injury during a raid gone wrong, he had been deemed unfit for further service until Sheriff Tom, moved by the dog's history and in search of a steady companion for his daughter, had brought him home. Claire had bonded with Griffin faster than anyone expected. Perhaps it was because he never forced interaction, he simply existed beside her, silent, steady, protective. She trusted him in ways she couldn't articulate. This morning, the two made their way down Sycamore Avenue, Claire's gloved hand resting on Griffin's back, just as she had been trained. She carried a canvas tote bag folded neatly inside her jacket pocket, walking with methodical steps always, even always, avoiding cracks in the sidewalk. Her breath came out in steady puffs, and she occasionally whispered to herself, 19 steps to the mailbox. 20, 21. Across town on the other side of the slowly awakening Evergreen, inside a converted auto garage cloaked in grime and shadow, Ryder Shaw leaned against the hood of a black Harley-Davidson. Ryder was in his early 40s, barrel-chested and angular, with a jagged scar running from his temple down to the edge of his jaw. His beard was peppered with gray and uneven, and his eyes held the kind of cold calculation that came from years of unchecked power. He wore a patched leather vest over a faded army green shirt, his arms covered in ink skulls, dogs, and barbed wire. Ryder was the leader of the Bloodhounds, and, unlike most of his crew, he wasn't just a thug. He had once worn a badge himself. Years ago, he had served alongside Sheriff Tom Morgan before a corruption scandal ended his career and landed him in county lockup. Since then, he'd taken the slow road back to power through intimidation drug runs and threats carefully veiled in charm. Standing just a few feet away from Ryder was his younger brother, Logan Shaw. 35 and wiry Logan still carried the lean, muscled frame of a former Marine. His sandy blonde hair was clipped short, and his face was hollow with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow. Unlike Ryder, his eyes flickered constantly, not out of nervousness, but as though he was trying to keep a dozen internal wars at bay. Logan had returned from Afghanistan with a Purple Heart, a shattered kneecap, and enough nightmares to fill volumes. At first, he tried rebuilding his life in silence, but delays in veteran benefits and a string of painkiller prescriptions had nudged him down the path of dependency. When Ryder offered him a place in the gang, it wasn't brotherly love, it was survival. And yet, something in Logan had begun to shift lately. Perhaps it was the tremble in his hand that wouldn't stop, or the memory of the kids he'd once guarded overseas. Or maybe it was the feeling that Ryder's operations were inching closer to something truly unforgivable. As Logan stared at the map Ryder had scrawled across the garage wall, routes, drop points, contacts, his stomach turned. "We're not going after kids, are we?" Ryder scoffed. "We're not monsters, Logan. But if Tom wants to mess with our business, maybe a little leverage will remind him of his place." Outside, the sound of boots on gravel shifted Logan's attention. He stepped toward the garage entrance just in time to see a figure rounding the corner of the street small, slight with a familiar golden-furred dog at her side. His gut twisted. "That's Claire Morgan," Logan said quietly. "And that's the dog Tom rescued from Portland K9. Ryder's eyes narrowed. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Logan turned sharply. "She's just a kid, Rye. Don't even think about it." But Ryder wasn't listening. He was already moving toward his bike, a grin creeping across his face. This town needs a reminder of who runs it. And just like that, the fog in Evergreen deepened. The clouds had thickened over Evergreen, turning the late morning into a gray canvas, veiling the sun in a silvery gloom. The sidewalks along Maple Avenue, usually quiet, lined with damp hedges, and the occasional garden gnome now seemed to close in like a stage for something far too tense for such a small town. Claire Morgan, her gloved hand still resting on Griffin's broad back, had just rounded the corner past the bakery when she felt it. A change in the air, not the breeze, not the cold. Something deeper. Griffin sensed it too. His body stiffened beneath her touch head, tilting slightly, nostrils flaring. He shifted his stance, placing himself more directly between Claire and the end of the block. Claire paused. Her routine had been disrupted. She didn't like that. The disruption came with noise, a low rumble, not thunder, engines. From 2 different directions motorcycles appeared, not roaring in recklessly, but crawling in slow like wolves approaching a calf. 5 men in total, leather jackets, chrome glinting off handlebars, the Bloodhounds. Leading them was Ryder Shaw. His dark leather vest had a reaper skull stitched into the back, and his boots struck the pavement like declarations of control. He dismounted with a sense of ownership, pushing his sunglasses up to reveal pale, predator-sharp eyes. The others followed, forming a loose semicircle. Each one looked like a character, drawn in ink. Coarse beards, heavy boots, faded denim. Only Logan hesitated. He hadn't expected Ryder to act so quickly or so publicly. Claire's heart began to race. The sensory inputs were stacking: the growl of engines, the smell of oil, the sneer in Ryder's voice as he called out, "Hey there, sweetheart." Out on your own, she froze. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in overload. She didn't know which sense to respond to. She reached for her tote bag, instinctively holding it close. Griffin moved half a step forward. The dog's ears were erect now, his stance squared. He emitted a low, sustained growl, not from fear, but command. Logan stepped off his bike slowly. His leather jacket hung looser on his frame than his brother's. His jeans were worn at the knees, boots scuffed. He still had the gait of a Marine, efficient, measured, but his shoulders bore a permanent sag as if burdened by years of things unsaid. His hands twitched slightly, whether from nerves or withdrawal only he knew. "Ryder, this isn't what he began. But Ryder cut him off with a look. "We're not hurting anyone. We're just talking." His eyes locked onto Claire, then to Griffin. "Nice dog you got there." Claire backed a step. She couldn't process their faces. Too many voices. Too loud. She clutched Griffin's fur tighter. Somewhere in her memory, buried beneath therapy sessions and backyard drills, her father's voice echoed. "If you're ever scared, if your mind freezes, just say the word." The word they had practiced over and over. Her lips moved barely a whisper. "Guard." It was enough. Griffin changed. The golden retriever, often mistaken for a family pet, became a trained sentinel. He lowered his center of gravity, stepped in front of Claire, and stared directly at Ryder. His hackles raised not in aggression, but in precision. This was not fear. This was protection honed by drills, sharpened by war zones. Ryder stopped mid-step. That's a damn K9. Claire didn't know what Griffin would do next. But Griffin did. One of the men behind Ryder, broad-shouldered with a braided beard and a jagged tattoo of a snake curling around his neck, took a step closer, trying to loop behind. Griffin barked sharp and calibrated. The man flinched. Ryder growled lowly, "Back off," but it was too late. Claire, trembling, reached for the whistle clipped beneath her jacket. She blew 3 short blasts, piercing and high. Logan tensed. The shrill sound broke something in him. He saw not a gang mission, not a power play, but a little girl with shaking hands and a dog standing against 5 grown men. Something primal inside him, buried beneath years of silence, pain, and shame, reawakened. He stepped forward, raising a hand. "Everyone back off. Now." Ryder's head turned, eyes narrowing. "Logan, what the hell do you think you're doing? She's a kid," Rye Logan said, voice firm. "She's not part of this." And neither were a dozen others. Ryder snapped. "You gonna grow a conscience now?" Griffin remained, frozen eyes darting between them, calculating danger. His tail was stiff, his body poised. Claire whispered again, almost to herself, "Good boy? Good boy?" Another man tried to make a move, slow reaching behind his vest. Griffin exploded into motion. The dog lunged, teeth latching not into flesh, but sleeve yanking the man's arm sideways. A clean, practiced takedown. The man cried out off balance, falling hard. Griffin released immediately, snapping back into place, snarling. It was all control, no frenzy. Ryder stepped back now. This was no ordinary pet. He's police-trained. Where the hell did Tom get him? Claire spoke not loud, but clear. "He's mine." The men looked at her, then at each other, unsure whether to laugh or be afraid. Logan's decision crystallized. He moved, placing himself between Ryder and Claire. He didn't say anything this time. His stance said it all. "You're with them now," Ryder hissed. "I'm with her," Logan replied. "And the dog that's got more courage in one paw than we ever did." Ryder's face twisted into something unrecognizable. He stepped back toward his bike, motioning for the others. "We'll finish this later." They retreated, not in defeat, but in deferral. Claire sank to her knees, burying her face in Griffin's fur. Logan crouched beside them, not touching, just breathing. "You did good, kid," he said quietly. Griffin kept his eyes on the retreating gang, his posture still locked. Sheriff Tom Morgan stood beneath the cold glow of the crime scene floodlights, his boots crunching over broken glass near the corner of Maple Avenue. The street had already been cleared, but remnants of the confrontation still lingered: a dropped chain from a biker's vest, a streak of oil from one of the motorcycles, and most disturbingly, the quiet shiver of his daughter still clinging to Griffin's golden fur on the curb. His breath came short as he approached. Tom was a man in his early 50s with deep-set green eyes and a square jaw often clenched too tight for comfort. Years of policing had etched crow's feet around his eyes and gray into his temples. He moved with a quiet authority, tall, built like an oak tree, but with a gentleness reserved only for two people in the world, his wife Violet and his daughter Claire. His badge gleamed faintly in the twilight, catching the pulsing red and blue from the patrol cars flanking the scene. He knelt beside Claire, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Claire nodded, stiffly, not speaking. Her fingers remained buried in Griffin's fur, her eyes glassy. Tom followed her gaze and saw the tension still rippling through the dog's posture, his hind leg trembling slightly, not from fear, but strain. "Griffin?" Tom asked softly. The dog didn't look up. His focus was still tracking the street, though the danger had long passed. Tom reached under the shepherd's rear flank gently and felt the heat, the swelling. "Damn. He's hurt." A deputy approached. Younger, uncertain, barely out of academy. "We've got one in custody. Mitch Rayner. Caught him trying to loop back on foot. Claims he just came for a ride. Says Ryder didn't tell them anything." Tom stood brushing his jacket smooth. "Take him to holding. Book him on obstruction. And call in Officer Lane. I want to know every step Ryder's crew took today, who they talked to, and where they refueled." "Yes, sir." Tom watched the cruiser roll away with the suspect, then turned to another figure who had been lingering near the ambulance, Logan Shaw. He stood in the shadows, his hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he was afraid to take up space. His eyes were cast downward, ashamed, though he didn't look away when Tom approached. "You protected my daughter," Tom said flatly. "Why?" Logan's voice was rough. "Because she shouldn't have been part of this. None of this is right." Tom narrowed his eyes. "You're still running with Ryder. If you've got something to say, say it now, because if I find out you're playing both sides, I'm not." Logan stepped forward, the dim light catching the shadows under his eyes. Ryder's planning something bigger. This wasn't just to scare Claire. He needed a distraction. Tom's jaw tightened. "For what?" the evidence lockup Logan said. "Your station's holding something from the Johansson bust last year's shipment that never got logged properly. Diamonds hidden in antique furniture. Ryder knows it's still in the vault. He's got someone on the inside, plans to hit the station during shift change." Tom exhaled slowly. "When soon? Tonight or tomorrow?" "You're coming with me," Tom said. "You're not just walking away after dropping that kind of bomb." Logan didn't argue. Back at the Morgan home, the lights in the kitchen window glowed against the falling dusk. Inside, Violet, Morgan stood at the counter chopping carrots for a slow stew she no longer cared about finishing. She was tall, with long ash-blonde hair pulled back into a loose braid and sharp cheekbones that gave her an air of fierce grace. Once, a trauma nurse in Portland, she had given up that world after a miscarriage 10 years ago, the emotional toll too great. Since then, she had found new purpose in Evergreen's small clinic, where she now served as head nurse. She was calm under pressure, methodical in speech, but when her phone rang, and she heard the voice of her husband say, "Claire's okay," but Griffin's injured, her hands went still. By the time Tom arrived home with Claire in his arms and Griffin limping softly behind Violet had cleared the dining room floor and laid out a comfort mat, towels, and her emergency vet kit. She examined Griffin quickly, her brow furrowed. "It's his hind leg, swelling along the joint. Muscle tear may be worse." She looked up at Tom. "He needs surgery and soon. We'll take him to Dr. Langford in the morning," Tom said. "She might not have that long," Violet replied, already wrapping the leg with practiced hands. "We'll have to keep him still tonight. No stairs. And keep Claire calm." Claire, who had been sitting silently beside Griffin, finally whispered, "Will he be okay?" Violet softened. "He will. But he needs to rest, just like we do when our body gets too tired." Claire didn't answer, but she nodded and leaned gently against the dog's side, her little fingers curling into his fur. Later that night, while Claire slept on the couch beside Griffin's mat, Tom sat at the kitchen table with Logan. A notepad sat between them, and a police radio buzzed softly in the background. "There's someone inside the station," Logan said, glancing over his shoulder, his voice low. "Ryder didn't give me a name, but said they'd get him in before midnight. Said it'd be over before anyone noticed." Tom pinched the bridge of his nose. "And you believed him? I've seen his plans before. He's not bluffing." Logan looked down at the cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "I didn't know about the girl until today. I didn't sign up for that." Tom studied him. "You're here now. That counts. But it won't mean anything unless you're ready to testify." Logan hesitated, then nodded. "Whatever it takes." Outside, the wind picked up. The town of Evergreen curled into itself beneath the weight of coming danger, unaware that in one house, a broken veteran and a sheriff were already preparing for war. The morning haze had not yet lifted from Evergreen when Violet Morgan unlocked the doors to the Evergreen Community Health Clinic. The clinic sat tucked beside the local post office, a modest red brick building with 3 examination rooms, a narrow hallway lined with medical posters from the early 2000s, and a front lobby with mismatched chairs that still carried the scent of antiseptic and coffee. Violet had barely slept. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but she moved with a grace and determination that masked the storm beneath. Griffin lay on a folded blanket in exam room 2, a padded brace supporting his injured leg. The sedatives were wearing off. His breathing was shallow but steady, and his gaze tracked every movement Violet made. Claire sat curled beside him in an old recliner pulled from the nurse's lounge, one hand on Griffin's fur, the other holding a sketch pad where she was drawing concentric circles in blue crayon. "Still no pain whining," Violet noted softly, checking the IV. "He's stubborn, just like someone else I know." Claire didn't look up, but a faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. In the front lobby, a new figure sat at the receptionist's desk. Nora Bell, a short, soft-spoken woman in her late 40s, with salt and pepper curls and a collection of cat-shaped brooches she wore depending on the season. Today's was a silver tabby. Nora had worked at the clinic for 15 years and was known for her calm demeanor and obsession with tea. She had brewed chamomile for Claire and lemon ginger for Violet, her own method of silent comfort. "Still quiet out there?" Violet asked as she stepped into the lobby. "Quieter than I like," Nora replied. "Feels like something's coming." And something was. At exactly 9:03 a.m., the front door burst open. Ryder Shaw strode into the clinic like he owned it. Jacket open, eyes dark, a 9mm pistol drawn in one hand, and in the other a black box duct-taped with wires, and a blinking light on top. His presence was chilling, not because he shouted, but because he didn't. His movements were precise, unhurried, calculated. He wore a calm that was more dangerous than rage. Everyone against the wall. Now, he said, gesturing with the gun. Nora froze. Violet stepped in front of Claire's room instinctively. Ryder turned his gaze on her. You must be the nurse. And that means the little girl's behind you. Put that down. Violet said, her voice low but steady. You're making a mistake. No, sweetheart. I'm fixing one. Ryder raised the device. Fake or not, I wouldn't gamble if I were you. He pushed Violet aside and entered the room. Claire looked up slowly, not yet frightened, just processing. Griffin lifted his head. Ryder's smile twitched. Still breathing, huh? He muttered, then focused on Claire. You're gonna help me. Call your dad. Tell him to come with the key to the evidence vault. You're my insurance. Claire didn't move. Her fingers tightened around Griffin's fur. Meanwhile, just 2 blocks away, Sheriff Tom Morgan stood beside his patrol car scanning the clinic through binoculars. A radio crackled in his hand. Inside his vest pocket was the actual key to the evidence room, something no one outside the department was supposed to know he still kept on him. Logan had warned him this was coming. Tom turned to Logan, who stood beside him, dressed in an old gray hoodie and jeans. The night had aged him, his skin pale, his eyes bloodshot, but his posture was steady. This is it, Tom said. He's after Claire. You still sure? Logan nodded. I'll go first, 'cause a diversion. Just get her out. Tom looked at him a long moment, then gave a nod. Back inside, Ryder was growing agitated. He barked orders at Violet and Nora, now zip-tied in the lobby. Claire hadn't spoken a word. He waved the gun. I said, call him. Claire blinked slowly. Her lips parted. Griffin, she whispered now. The words were soft, but to Griffin they rang like a gunshot. In a blur of motion, the golden retriever launched from the blanket with all the force he could summon. The brace on his leg bent, but didn't snap. Pain flared in his side, but he ignored it, teeth bared. He collided with Ryder just as the man turned his weapon. Gun and device both flew from Ryder's hands as Griffin's jaws clamped around his forearm. He screamed, tumbling backward, trying to free himself. The fake explosive skidded under the exam table. Logan burst through the side hallway entrance just as chaos broke out. He tackled one of Ryder's men who had been posted by the rear. A scuffle followed Logan taking a punch to the jaw before slamming the biker's head against the wall, hard enough to knock him unconscious. Sheriff Tom moved fast. He stormed the front weapon drawn. Drop it, he shouted. Ryder wrestled free of Griffin, bleeding, panting, and went for the gun. Claire, surprisingly calm, slid from her chair and pressed her back against the far wall, pulling Griffin protectively toward her. Logan grabbed Ryder by the collar from behind, yanking him off balance. Tom moved in. One shot fired. A warning. Ryder froze. Tom tackled him to the ground and yanked his arms behind his back. It's over, he growled. Nora, shaken but intact, was already freeing Violet from the restraints. Violet rushed to Claire, who was still holding on to Griffin's fur. Logan stood in the doorway, bruised and breathing hard. Claire looked at him and said simply, You came back. Logan crouched beside her. You taught me, how he said. You showed me what courage looks like. Outside, sirens filled the air. The moment had passed, but the lesson for everyone there would stay. The late autumn sun spilled through the front windows of the Morgan home, casting long golden beams across the hardwood floor and onto the large orthopedic recovery bed set up beside the family fireplace. The scent of pine from the nearby forest drifted through the slightly ajar window, mingling with the clean linen smell of fresh bandages and antiseptic. The Morgan living room, once a space for quiet evenings and movie nights, had been transformed into a small rehabilitation haven for one very special patient. Griffin, the 7-year-old golden retriever, lay curled on the memory foam bedding his hind leg, wrapped in a custom-fitted brace. His golden coat had dulled slightly since the incident at the clinic, but his eyes remained warm and watchful. He still bore the presence of a sentinel even as he healed. When Claire entered the room barefoot and clutching a stack of papers and colored pencils, he raised his head and let out a low thump of his tail. "Good afternoon, gatekeeper," Claire whispered. She had started calling him that after hearing Violet say Griffin had stood at the gates of something awful and held the line. The term resonated with her in ways she couldn't quite explain, but it felt right. Claire had changed too. Her posture was still slightly withdrawn, her words still chosen carefully and slowly, but the shift was noticeable. She spent less time hiding behind doors or wrapping herself in silence. Instead, she'd begun drawing again dozens of pages filled with images of Griffin in capes on mountains in armor. Every night she sat beside him and read her stories aloud, her voice growing steadier with each tale. Violet watched from the hallway with quiet awe. Her daughter, who once struggled to maintain eye contact even with family, now leaned against the massive dog as naturally as sunlight leans into a window pane. The Morgan home had adapted quickly. Tom had restructured the living room around Griffin's needs. A low ramp had been added to the back door. Medical supplies were stored in labeled containers beside the fireplace. A whiteboard near the dining room tracked medications and physical therapy schedules. On it, in careful block letters, Claire had written, "We heal together." Tom now moved slower himself, not from injury but reflection. The arrest of Ryder Shaw had pulled Evergreen back from the brink, but not without consequence. Ryder's sentencing 15 years for attempted kidnapping, false threat of terrorism, and organized crime was still being talked about across town. But it was Logan's story that lingered more quietly in local circles. Logan Shaw had stood before the Evergreen courthouse a week ago, dressed in a donated gray blazer, and the same weathered boots he'd worn into battle both abroad and at home. Judge Helms, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with tight silver curls and wire-rimmed glasses, had listened intently as Logan read a statement he'd written by hand. He spoke not only of his guilt and betrayal, but of the little girl who reminded him what courage looked like, and the dog that didn't hesitate to protect her. Thanks to his cooperation and with Sheriff Tom's testimony, Logan was granted a suspended sentence and mandatory community service. But what surprised everyone was what he chose to do next. He began training. Under the mentorship of a local veteran named Harlan Riggs, a retired Army K-9 handler in his 70s, with a broad-frame, gravelly voice and a prosthetic arm, Logan started learning how to rehabilitate working dogs with trauma. Harlan had lost 3 of his 4 service dogs over the years, but his compassion never faded. He wore his grief like a badge, but channeled it into training canines to help others heal. Logan took to the work quickly, though he still bore the ghosts of his past nightmares, twitches, moments of self-doubt. He began rebuilding. Each morning, he biked across town to the rehab field behind Harlan's small ranch, where he worked with animals that had been discarded after service. Dogs with missing limbs, PTSD, or fear aggression. Logan didn't flinch. He knew what it meant to feel broken and still want to serve. Back at the Morgan house, Tom adjusted the last Velcro strap on Griffin's brace and gave him a firm pat. "You're doing good, buddy. Better every day." Claire appeared with 2 drawings in hand. One was of Griffin standing on top of a mountain with stars behind him. The other showed Logan in cartoon form, shaking hands with a one-eyed German shepherd in a field of flowers. "Can we give this to him?" she asked. Tom smiled. "I think he'd like that." A soft knock came at the door later that afternoon. When Violet opened it, Logan stood there in a clean navy blue hoodie and jeans, holding a box of specialized joint supplements in one hand and a laminated progress chart in the other. "I brought his rehab plan," he said, eyes scanning the room until they landed on Griffin. Claire bounded to the door and handed him the drawing. Logan looked at it, blinked hard, then crouched down and hugged her. A gentle, careful hug, brief but real. "I'll hang it where the dogs can see it," he said. Before leaving, Logan crouched beside Griffin and gently stroked the dog's fur. "I've got trainees coming in who'd fall apart at half the things you've seen. You're the standard now." Griffin let out a soft woof, his eyes blinking with that deep, calm understanding only a dog could possess. As the sun dipped behind the tree line, the house settled into quiet. Claire tucked a blanket around Griffin, kissed his head once, then crawled into her reading chair and opened a fresh notebook. The gatekeeper was home. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come with thunder or fire, but in the quiet courage of a child, the unwavering loyalty of a wounded dog, or the redemption of a broken soul. Griffin didn't just protect Claire. He reminded us that healing is possible, that bravery doesn't always look like strength, and that even in pain we can choose love over fear. We believe that God works through the smallest acts, a whisper, a paw, a second chance. And perhaps in Griffin's watchful eyes and Claire's gentle spirit, we catch a glimpse of the divine hand guiding us through the storms of life. In our daily lives, we often rush past moments that hold meaning. But if we slow down, listen closely, and open our hearts, we may find that God still speaks through loyalty, forgiveness, and the quiet guardians who walk beside us. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment below and say, "Amen," if you believe that courage, love, and second chances are God's way of reminding us we're never truly alone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, stories that heal, uplift, and reveal the light in the darkness. May God bless you and your family. Amen.